Hello, my name is Roy Ciampa. I've just recently retired as a professor of biblical and religious studies at Samford University. In retirement, I'm doing some teaching for Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary, where I've taught for many years.
Dr. Roy Ciampa, good to see you. Welcome to Exegetically Speaking. Roy, thank you for being with us.
It's good to see you. It's good to be here. Thank you for having me.
So you're living up in New Hampshire now, loving the all the change of the seasons. We're recording this in fall of 2024.
Very much so, yes. We love it here. We get to walk down to a lake nearby, Lake Winnipesaukee, every day pretty much, and take in the change of the seasons and the fall colors right now. It's beautiful.
Particularly that time of year. Now, how did you get started reading Greek?
Well, I came to faith in my first year at university. I was studying aeronautical studies, and then I switched over. I sensed that God called me to ministry. I went off to what was Liberty Baptist College at the time, which is now Liberty University, and studied religious studies or religion at the time. And one of the first courses I took was in Greek. I wanted to know the Bible. I had never really studied the Bible. Growing up, I didn't really know it, and I wanted to know it not just in English, but in Greek. And then after a year, I transferred to Gordon College up in Massachusetts and continued reading. I actually redid Greek 1 all over again with a whole different professor and a whole different approach, and have been reading it ever since.
I took Greek, we called it baby Greek back in the day. I did it twice, and I think that really helped me in a lot of ways. Mm-hmm. And of course, I went on to teach Greek for 25 years and am still teaching some Greek. But going back over that more than once was very helpful. So if you can do that, it's always helpful to do that. Now today, I'm very excited because we're talking about Romans 1:17. I always love getting in Romans with people. But you've written on this in a couple of articles that we're going to post in our show notes. But in particular, Romans 1:17 is a really important verse, isn't it, Roy?
It is.
Set it up for us a little bit.
Sure. Many people think that Romans 1:16 and 17 provide the thesis statement for the letter as a whole. Others would argue that it's a thesis statement for at least the first 8 chapters. And so it ends up being a crucial verse for our understanding of Romans, and certainly a crucial verse for our understanding of justification by faith, which is crucial to the argument of Romans. My approach to what's going on in Romans 1:16 actually kind of pivots on the background to the key expression that we find there.
Romans 1:16, do you want to sort of just give us your reading and translation of that before we move to 17?
Sure. For I'm not ashamed of the gospel, for it is the power of God unto or to salvation for everyone who believes, for the Jew first, and also the Gentile or the Greek. For the righteousness of God is revealed in it, I would say, through faith, for faith, just as it is written, the righteous through faith will live. Now that through faith and for faith, that part of verse 17, translated lots of different ways, and we can talk about why I hesitated and why I translated it the way I did.
Well, the phrase in Greek is ek pisteos eis pistin, right? So you have the pisteo word, the word for faith or trust or that kind of thing, and you have 2 prepositions, an ek pisteos and then an eis pistin. So they take a different ending or different sound at the end, so that's why it's pisteos and pistin.
That's right. And that leads into the quotation from Habakkuk 2:4, where Paul says, "Kathos," that is, just as it is written, ha dikaios ek pisteos zesatai. And by the way, this is usually translated, the righteous will live by faith. It might take too long to go into. I think Paul normally takes this to read, the righteous by faith will live. And so much of his letter is about what it means to be righteous by faith. And the interesting thing is, depending on how the translation reads, you may not realize that there's an ek pisteos in the verse before you get to the quotation of Habakkuk 2:4. So sometimes people translate it, that it's revealed from faith to faith, just as it is written, the righteous will live by faith. And so the ek pisteos at the end, where the quotations from Habakkuk 2:4 is often translated by faith. But you have another ek pistos earlier in the verse, which is often translated from faith. Now, I think the NIV translates it something to the effect that it's from faith or by faith, from first to last, just as it is written, the righteous will live by faith. And whatever the strengths or weaknesses of that translation, at least it preserves the idea that you have this by faith in Habakkuk 2:4, and the same expression shows up in the lead up to Habakkuk 2:4 in verse 17. And that expression, the ek pistos that you're talking about, it ends up being so crucial. We today talk about by faith or through faith all the time. It's just natural language. We live by faith. We walk by faith. For Christianity for 2,000 years, talking about things being by faith has been natural. Interestingly, when we go back and we look at Greek, and we look at all of Greek literature, all of Greek papyri, all of Greek inscriptions, that is all of the Greek that we can find, in the whole history of Greek from the beginning of the language up until the time of the New Testament, nowhere do we ever find the expression ek pisteos, the one from Habakkuk 2:4, until Habakkuk 2:4 gets translated into Greek in the Septuagint, or what we call the Old Greek. That's the first time the expression ever appears in all of Greek. And interestingly, when we find these manuscripts, whether it's what we call Greek recensions or Greek manuscripts of Habakkuk 2:4, some of them reword it, and they don't translate it ek pisteos, but en piste or piste. In other words, it seems as though even for the original Greek scribes, that ek pisteos wasn't the most natural or smoothest way to translate it, and so they opted for other language. We find the same thing with people who actually do quote it with ek pistos, as in the letter to the Hebrews. When we get near the end of chapter 10, the author quotes Habakkuk 2:4, including the ek pistos, and the righteous by faith will live, or the righteous will live by faith. And then they slide into what we call chapter 11, and it's all the way through, it's by faith this one did that, and by faith this one did that, and by faith, all of these by faith, by faith, by faith, are clearly following up on the Habakkuk 2:4, but in chapter 11, it's piste, piste, piste. So cited according to the Septuagint, but then kind of slightly reword it to make it a little bit smoother. I think it sounded better, and I also think that it's clear, ek can have various meanings in Greek, and I think the piste sounds more natural, and I think it's a more obvious way of rendering the idea of by or through, which is why Paul himself, while he will often cite or use the language ek piste, typically in the context he'll switch over to, ek pistos is what I mean. Ek pistos, he'll switch over to the language of diapistos. And I think basically he's trying to say this is what he takes ek pistos to mean. Yeah, what we all understand diapistos to be.
Be like through faith at that point. It struck me as you were talking, there's a lot of theology in prepositions.
There is.
Through faith, by faith, from faith. I mean, all of these just really become fairly crucial. I thought you translated that Habakkuk 2:4 very interesting. Just as it has been written, the righteous will live by faith. Is that how you translate it?
No, I translated it just as it is written, the righteous by faith will live.
Okay, well, that's the word order, right? The righteous will live.
Well, that's the word order, and the key question is whether or not the ek pistos modifies the verb, or dikaios, understood to be a verbal noun. Normally, prepositional phrases modify verb clauses or verbs, but they can modify verbal nouns.
Exactly, yeah.
And in Paul's reading, so C.E.B. Cranfield is one who pointed out, and you can do the search if you have Bible software. So you can do a search for all of words based on the dikai root, for the righteousness, justification root, and the pistis root, like pistuo for the verb or pistis for the noun. And you can search on where they appear in proximity to each other. And they appear all over chapters 1 through 4, leading up to Romans 5:1. And then they basically disappear from Romans 5 through 8. And then you can also do a search for the language of life or living, so zao or zoe, and you find out that that appears one other time besides in Habakkuk 2:4 here in Romans 1:17, but then basically doesn't appear in Romans 1 through 4, but then appears multiple times in Romans 5 through 8.
Wow.
And Cranfield actually argued Paul is summarizing what it means to be righteous by faith from Habakkuk 2:4 in chapters 1 through 4, and what it means to live once you've been made righteous by faith in chapters 5 through 8.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's true, but it's an interesting observation.
I think it's a great observation, and I've used that before. So much about Paul's sort of language about life in the Spirit seems to be represented in those earlier things. But this is a great reading, Roy, of this passage. Thanks for being with us today on Exegetically Speaking.
Thank you for having me.
We will put a link in the show notes to the article Dr. Ciampa was talking about. So much great Greek and great theology in Romans, and Habakkuk 2:4 is so foundational for Paul. It really shapes his theology. If you'd like to study Greek, let me recommend the Wheaton College. It has the best faculty, the best facilities, the best students of any place that I know. You're going to find a link in the show notes so you can get started today. Whether you're a graduate student or an undergraduate, there is a program for you. Thanks to Phil Kagi for our music. Thanks to our audio editor, my fine wife, Kathy Capes. Thanks to our Wheaton-based team, led ably by Dr. John Lansma. If you like the podcast, please rate us highly and tell a friend about us. Until next time, I'm David Capes. Thanks for listening.